Hi, I'm Brennan Storr.
I'm Paul Bistel.
We're the Ghost Story Guys. And every 2 weeks we bring you true life stories of the paranormal, told with humor, humanity, and just a pinch of skepticism.
Well, to be fair, I'm not aware of many incidents involving people flashing ghosts.
No, not intentionally, at least. I mean, I'm sure my family has looked down on me or up at me in some cases and thought, okay, put some pants on, would you? just why? Other people have to sit on that couch. Whether you're a true believer or you think all this ghost stuff is bullshit, but you still like scary stories, odds are we've got something for you. It's a big tent and everyone's welcome. As long as you don't mind the odd 4-letter word. Fuck, for example. Shit like that. You can find us at ghoststoryguys.com, instagram.com/theghoststoryguys, or by searching for The Ghost Story Guys everywhere. Find podcasts live.
Yes, Reggie, yes, such a good boy. Well, hello there, my little kitty cats, and welcome to the 13th episode. Can you believe it's been 13 episodes already, and finally, my favorite number? Well, I've been busy typing up your stories. Thank you for sending them in. Keep them coming. Anything strange or out of the ordinary that's ever happened to you, do send them to my email address, deadlydebbie@mail.com, or you can submit them through my website at deadlydebbie.com. Now, this first story packs quite a bite. It was July of 1981. I was 28 years old and I was working at a retail store called Treasure Island in a small town in Ohio until I quit the job to go out to the farm with my friends. Myself and a couple of friends had been helping out at the farm in the Pennsylvania Laurel Mountains for about a month with a few other people that my friends knew, but I did not. There were 2 farmhouses on this property. The first was at the front of the property, where the farmer, his wife, and one of his grandchildren lived. The second house sat about a mile away, all by itself, at the back of the property. This is where we stayed for the entire summer, a summer I will never forget. It was just a few days after the 4th of July, because I remember we went into town for the celebration a few days before these events took place. It was a hot, sticky, humid evening, and we had just returned from hilling potatoes in a field, about a 15-minute walk from the house we were staying in. I remember I was standing with a few others on the corner of the porch, knocking the mud off my boots when I saw it. Skirting the tree line toward us, it was a skinny black dog of which nobody could tell its type. Its coat seemed to be greasy in some places and matted or messy in others. It looked hungry. You could see it in his eyes, even from a distance. I mentioned the dog to my friends and asked if anyone knew whose dog it was, and no one had any clue where the dog came from. The dog wanted to come near us, you could tell, but it ended up keeping its distance and disappeared as we were caught up in conversation with each other. About 5 or 6 days later, in the early afternoon, I was washing clothes on the front porch with an old wringer washer, and I had a strange feeling come over me. I looked at the tree line, and I noticed the black dog watching me from there. Once the dog was aware that I noticed it, it casually ducked back into the woods and disappeared. I thought to myself that something was a little off with this animal, but I wrote it off and continued on with my chores. The third encounter was a little more unsettling. It was midday, and I was walking back home from the dairy barn, which was located close to the main farmhouse. I was bringing back milk for myself and the others when I saw the dog just ahead, about 100 feet or so. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was standing there, staring and growling at me. It was a very deep and low growl. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I locked eyes with the creature. I knew that I was vulnerable in that moment, and I knew that that dog knew that. There was really no place that I would be able to hide from it if it chose to attack. I finally got up the nerve to try and make it to the house without letting the animal think that I was afraid. I began to walk, as casual as possible, towards the farmhouse at the back of the property. The dog followed me for a short distance every step of the way, growling. When I reached the farmhouse, the dog ran off and disappeared into the tree line. 2 or 3 weeks later, I was alone at the house. It was late afternoon and it was my turn to clean the house, so everybody else went into town for a little day adventure. As I was sweeping the old wooden floors in the kitchen, I remember noticing that there were pieces of linoleum acting as patches covering the holes and cracks in the kitchen floor. All of a sudden, there was this strange sound. I stopped sweeping and listened for a moment. I couldn't tell where it was coming from at first, so I continued listening. After a few moments, I decided that it sounded like it was coming from underneath me, under the floors. It was a scratching sound, like something was trying to dig its way upward into the house. I immediately pictured whatever it was bursting up through one of the holes in the floor, trying to attack me. Instead of panicking, I went to the kitchen window, leaned out and started banging on the outside of the house, trying to scare whatever it was. After a moment, the black dog emerged from underneath the house. It stood about 5 feet from me and gave me a death stare, accompanied by one of its signature low growls. I realized that the dog could reach me if I were to jump. I even had a little vision of the dog jumping up into the house. Now, I began to panic. I closed the window and watched the black dog. It quickly went back under the house and started trying to dig its way up through the floorboards again. I remember that there was a double-barreled shotgun by the front door, so I went and grabbed it and I stuffed a handful of shells from the box into my pocket. I had never fired a shotgun before, but I knew that there was a kick and that I should hold it tight against my shoulder. I gathered the nerve to go outside and try and scare it off. I slowly crept outside, shotgun ready, and searched for the black dog. I looked under the house, but it was dark under there and hard to make anything out. I looked around the property a little and then back under the house, but little did I know that it was watching me more than I was watching it. Out of the darkness and without warning, the dog vaulted out from under the house at me. I fired one shot to try and scare the dog. It stopped right in front of me, but otherwise didn't seem to even care that I fired that shot. It gave me that death glare again, and I could tell that it wanted to eat me. I could see it in its eyes. I took the shotgun and banged it against the house while yelling, trying to scare the dog off, at least long enough so that I could get back inside the house. The black dog went into attack mode and came at me full force. I pointed the gun and held on tight as I pulled the trigger. The gun went off and the dog went down to the ground, but not like you would expect. It didn't yipe and it didn't give any signs of being shot. It just lay there, in a pounce stance, growling at me again. I wasn't even sure if I hit it, but I definitely didn't seem to scare it. Its eyes were laughing at me in a sinister, mocking way, like it was saying, "You think you can kill me? I can't die." I fumbled the gun and tried to load 2 more shells. I only got 1 in because I was too frightened and I thought I was running out of time. I pointed the gun at the dog and slowly backed away, keeping my eyes locked with the dog's. In the meantime, the others were almost home and had heard the shots go off. They borrowed a tractor from the farm to reach me faster. Once they got there, they see me putting a final shot into the dog after it had tried for me again. It still didn't yipe or make any noise whatsoever. It just lay down and growled at me again. I knew that I had hit it that time though. I was cold and shaking and I didn't even notice that it had started to rain. I was soaking wet. I heard voices hollering my name, and I let my attention move from the dog to the guys on the tractor. They were heading right toward me. Once they reached me, I explained to them everything that happened. All the while, the dog was staring right at me. It still wanted its dinner. I told the guys that I had shot the dog once, maybe twice, and it still kept coming. The dog started creeping towards me again. It's like it was more determined to eat than live at this point. One of the guys took the shotgun and put another shot in the dog. This time it went down, but was still dead set on getting me. It kept on clawing its way toward me. Another one of the guys ran the dog over with the tractor. Not once, but a second, and then a third time before the dog stopped trying. We left the dead dog there and we all went back in the house for the night. After weeks of feeling strange and stalked and not sleeping well, I slept well that night, knowing that the dog wasn't going to be able to get me anymore. The next day, some of us went out to look at the dog. I didn't stay very long. I didn't want to. But what was a little out of the ordinary is that there was absolutely no blood, which reminded me there was no blood when I had shot the dog either. This spooked me, and I walked away thinking to myself, was this some sort of devil dog or something? And why did it want me? These are questions that have struck with me ever since. I still wonder about what the black dog was. It was more than just a rabid animal. I could feel it. I could see it in its eyes. Sometimes I wonder if I would have called someone to get the dog before these events, that would have helped put my mind at ease over the years. But I cannot change the past. I can only go forward in the knowledge that things like this do happen, and they have the power to haunt you for the rest of your life.
It was March 2017. I was 17 years old and a high school student. I visited my cousin in Savannah, Georgia for a week. We were both spooky girls, always searching for a spooky story, but never truly wanting to experience anything ourselves. We loved the thrill of being scared. We decided to visit one of my cousins and stay the night with her. As soon as I stepped foot in her house, I felt as though I had placed noise-canceling headphones on my ears. The house was 7 minutes away from the city downtown area of Savannah, and yet stepping foot inside resulted in the feeling someone would receive traveling in an isolated forest. It was an uncomfortable sort of quiet that made you uneasy with a foreboding sense of dread. I hadn't ever known the history of the house, but in nearly every room I went in, I found myself looking over my shoulder to catch whoever was staring at me. There was never anyone behind me. I could feel the house creak underneath my feet as I was given the tour. We went into the house, and the darker it got, even though the sun had started to peek through the broken clouds of the day. The air was stale and damp, as though it had been empty and not fully lived in for years. When night came, we all gathered up on the bed and started talking like young teenage girls do, and then it came to fall asleep. I was on the outside of the left of the bed with my cousin in the middle, and her cousin on the outside of her to the right. We turned out the lights, and immediately I felt the static in the air. I could not shake the feeling of someone watching all of us, but also refused to open my eyes. I tossed and turned, and sleep would not come to take over that internal fear that was slowly building up inside of me. And then I did the thing I wish I hadn't. I opened my eyes. As I let my eyes travel around the room, taking in the eerie quiet, they settled in the corner directly diagonal from me. The room was dark, as her cousin had blackout curtains and no source of small lighting entering the room. And yet, in the corner, there was a figure of someone, a person, that was darker than the already dark room. I don't know how to describe this blackness, other than stating that if there had been a sliver of light coming into the room, not even the light would be able to penetrate this darkness. I somehow locked eyes with this dark figure, and I just simply couldn't look away. There was an overwhelming feeling that came over me that that told me that this entity was a girl, or at least used to be. I felt my heart beat out of my ears as I realized this was not a trick of my imagination. It was not child-sized, but not extremely tall either. I would say about 4 feet 5 inches tall. She was about 7 feet away from the bed, and even though she was not extremely near it, it felt like she was looming. I could not see her face, but I knew she was staring at me. I went completely still, the kind of still that accompanies you when you realize you're lost or in danger. I remember not being able to look away, but no longer wanting to open my eyes either. I tried so much to explain it away, but I knew there was nothing in that corner of the room that would appear as the outline of a person. I was terrified. I began trying to quietly shake my cousin awake. When she stirred, I whispered, "Stephanie, do you see that?" I knew immediately when she saw what I'd been seeing, when I physically felt her body turn rigidly stiff. She whispered, "I'm scared. What is that?" Which resulted in us waking up Stephanie's cousin and turning a lamp on. When the light came on, I realized there was nothing in the corner to trick that sort of image. No chair, coat stand, door, or anything. We left the lamp on and tried to calm ourselves. The other two ended up falling asleep again sometime later, but I stayed awake listening to the house creak. There were sounds that sounded like someone was coming up the stairs and walking up and down the hallway. Long story short, I was grateful to see the first rays of sun and woke my cousin at 7 a.m. to hightail it out of the house. Apparently, Stephanie and her cousin were well aware that her house is 100% haunted, and many goings-on happen regularly. From lights and faucets turning on and off by themselves to noises and apparitions being seen by visitors and the residents. I was a believer to begin with, but this just solidified my belief in things we cannot explain. Love a good trip to Savannah, Georgia, where you can guarantee a spooky happening every time you visit. So I moved into a duplex with my ex-boyfriend 3 years ago in what we thought was a safer part of the city. One of our neighbours, Amber, works in the duplex rental office, and her husband, Ed, was at the time fresh out of prison and had been doing and continues to do landscape work for the rentals like mow the lawn, cut down trees, etc. Other than that, he's home mostly doing odds and ends, things like tinkering with his mower or truck or something. They are both super nice people, very kind and loving towards each other, and always offer to help out. We have smoked weed together a few times. Ed smokes more than Amber, and have talked about all kinds of things, so I thought I could trust them and felt very safe being their neighbour. I once mentioned how sometimes when I'm alone, I hear steps in the attic over my room, and what sounds like a chair being dragged. How sometimes the noise follows me around the house and always freaks me out to the point of calling someone just to feel a little safer until the noise dies down. Ed said, "What? You think we're spying on you?" In a laughing way, but it creeped me out a little. So then I break up with my boyfriend and he moves out. This is recent, so a few months ago. Ed started texting me asking if I wanted to smoke while Amber was still at work. I declined every time, finding different excuses because I felt uncomfortable around him. Then he asked me if I wanted to have sex with him because he thinks Amber is cheating on him. I definitely shut that down, and it was awkward as hell. I didn't tell Amber because I didn't want to get kicked out or have some horrible awkward tension, and I hate confrontation, so I kept quiet. That's when I start to hear things in the attic above my room more often. It freaked me out even more when I woke up to a loud bang outside my front door at 3 or 4 a.m. When I went to examine it, there was a small lockpick outside my door on the ground, but no one around. I kept the lockpick, and the next day I texted a picture of it to Amber to let her know I thought someone was creeping around, and she said, "Oh, that's Ed. That's his ice pick. Not a lockpick, sweetie. No one can pick your deadbolt with that." But I know the difference between a 4 skinny-ass lockpick and an ice pick. I'm so scared to be alone here, especially at night.
Our attics connect, and it's not outlandish to think he could be up there spying on me. I even found a freshly drilled hole in the ceiling of my room. I just put some padded paper in it and tried not to think of it. I honestly hope nothing comes of it and I'm just being paranoid. A friend of mine I told me to go to the police. I really have no evidence. I have the lockpick still and pictures of my door being messed with, but when I've gone into the attic, it's completely empty. I've never gone in alone because its opening is in my garage and there's no ladder, so it requires 2 people. But as of now, it's a gaping hole above my washer and dryer and very hard to get into without good upper body strength. I'd call my ex to come home when the dragging would start, and by the time he got there, it'd be cleared out. So I'm hesitant to report anything with no evidence. This is 100% true. I'm staying with my boyfriend until I move out in a few weeks, despite my neighbours being upset I'm leaving. The other thing to address is, I didn't see any swastika tattoos until months after. I'd been hanging out on their back porch to smoke with them. He had his shirt off for the first time, and there were at least 3 on his body. It confused me because Amber and Ed are super Wiccan. She has Wicca tattoos all over, and so I believe maybe his tattoos were for protection in prison. Either way, after that, I stopped hanging around with them and would only speak to them if we were both outside at the same time.
I'm in London, UK. We're in a Tier 4 lockdown. Stay in your home, only go out for one shopping trip or exercise, no mixing with people outside of your own home or support bubble, etc., etc. With a mutating strain of COVID-19 rampaging through London, hospital beds nearly at capacity and death toll rising, it makes sense to stay indoors as much as possible. But every human being has a breaking point, and mine was 8 days of wandering around my 1-bedroom apartment. I'd talked myself out on Zoom and run out of conversations to talk to myself about. At 10 p.m, New Year's Eve, I decided to get some air and go for a quick walk the perimeter around the local park, all on main roads. Takes about 40 minutes. The plan was to stop at a local grocery store and pick up a bottle of red wine on the way back. Stepped out, with mask firmly affixed, and started walking. One thing that I was not prepared for was the eerily empty and almost silent streets. As it was just below freezing, I decided to hustle and cut through some side streets first. On hindsight, a big mistake. Navigating myself through very quiet side streets, I neared the park when I saw a van, Mercedes Sprinter size, turn in and rapidly approach me. Deciding to let them pass before crossing, I came to a halt. The van began to slow as it approached me. I could see the cab was occupied by 2 men between 25 and 40 years of age. Then it stopped. Window rolled down. One man leaned out. "Hey, friend. We're lost. Can you tell me the way to the station?" Alarm bells began to ring out immediately. What was a van doing out at this time, and why directions to the local train station in the middle of a Tier 4 lockdown? The van had stopped, so the side door was facing me. I stepped back a few paces and gave directions very quickly. "I did not understand all. I think best if you show us." With that, he opens his door, and the side door to the van opens to reveal another 2 men. I just turned and ran down the side street that I had emerged from. And then I heard it. "Shit. Take the van around. I follow him." Knowing that these guys were fitter and younger than I, a foot race to my apartment building was out of the question. The only advantage I had was a head start and, hopefully, local knowledge of the streets. The side street leads into a larger street that has homes, all with large hedges. I ran past a few homes and entered the front garden of a house that had the most imposing and opaque hedge. It was unlit. I ducked down. Lucky for me, that house did not have a motion sensor light. Within seconds, I heard footsteps. They went past me, stopped. I peeked through the hedge vegetation, very limited view, to see the man who had asked for directions. He was a few houses down from me and on the opposite side of the street. He was looking around. Then, the sound of the vehicle. I thought, oh no, the van. Lucky for me, it was a car. The man looked at his phone, looked around, pretending he was checking something, and then walked off, leaving the residential street as quickly as possible. The car continued its way. I waited for another 10 minutes, sitting behind the hedge in the front garden, practicing an explanation if the house lights came on. The house stayed unlit, and after my allotted time, I rose and quickly walked back to my apartment building, keeping to the shadows and reacting to every sound. I made it back, bolted the front door. Only when I sat down did I understand what I had just avoided. All this for some air and a bottle of red. I poured myself a black coffee and debated calling the police, but what would I say? Had anything really happened that they could act on? Intuition of being kidnapped or being in danger is not enough evidence. Plus, being a man, this would not be a priority, especially on a night that they would be overstretched on. I just waited in the new year realizing that I'd had a lucky escape and that I should stock up on red wine at a more decent time.
Hi, my name is Chris, and this is my story of an encounter I had at the Palace Theater in January of 2013. I'm part of a paranormal group out here in Texas called the West Houston Paranormal Society. In January of 2013, we went to do an overnight investigation of the Palace Theater in Seguin, Texas. Seguin is a small city just outside of San Antonio. The Palace Theater is a play and cinema theater built in 1960 and has been owned by the H.A. Daniels family since the 1930s. The theater plays host to the typical supposed experiences: scratches, shadow people, weird noises, etc. Another side note, the location is only 15 miles from a bridge off Interstate 10 called Woman Hollering Creek. The state of Texas named the bridge for the legend of La Llorona, or the Weeping Woman. Story goes that there were so many reports of crying and moaning reported in that area that they named the creek after her. So, about my experience. As I mentioned, we were there doing an overnight investigation of the Seguin Theater, and this happened during the last hour of our investigation, at about 4:30 a.m. I was in the main part of the theater with a fellow investigator. We had a laser grid light set up in the back reaching towards the stage, and we had taken a seat in the back left side if you're facing the stage. We were sitting about 5 seats apart in the same row and watching the dots for any distortion. I was slumped down in my chair a little with my arms crossed, feet apart about shoulder width, and did something I had done on many investigations. I fell asleep, or so I thought. Now, for about the past 10-15 years, I have experienced sleep paralysis on the regular. At one point, I was experiencing at least once a month, at all hours of the day. It became so commonplace that it never scared me. I wasn't worried about it because at that point, I knew it was just another episode and I just had to get through it. One thing that I've never had experienced, which I've heard from others, is this feeling of someone in the room with you during your sleep paralysis episode. Every episode I experienced just consisted of me looking around the room I was currently in while trying to move my body. Never once did I have an episode with something or someone in the room with me. Once I fell asleep in the theater, I immediately went into sleep paralysis mode. I knew that my eyes were closed, but I could still see the entire theater exactly as it was when I was awake, although with a sort of hazy look to everything, like I was looking through a filter. I was not able to see my body, but I could turn my head, in my mind of course, and I looked to my right to see the other investigators still in their chair. Then I looked back to the front, and that was when I noticed my view was obstructed by darkness. I looked up and saw, standing between my feet, a shadow person. I could see the head and shoulders. It was almost 6 feet tall. Suddenly, I got this feeling that it knew that I was aware of its presence and was looking at it. As soon as I got that feeling, this thing, in a super fast motion, bent forward and put its face, nose to black nose, with me. Then suddenly it entered me, through my head, like black smoke entering my body. My arms suddenly started feeling like electricity was going through them. Think of how a body part feels when it falls asleep, but 10 times more intense, and it was only in my arms. It was one of the weirdest sensations I've ever felt. I turned my head towards the other investigator and started trying to yell for her, knowing that if I could yell, it would wake me up and break the sleep paralysis spell. I was not able to yell, no matter how hard I tried. For what seemed like forever, but was probably no more than a few seconds, I struggled to get this thing out of my body. Finally, it was flung from my body, and at the exact same time, a thud came from the lobby behind us and was loud enough to wake me from my spell. After that, I went outside and paced back and forth, recounting everything that just happened to me and to try and explain it away or rationalize it. To this day, I still get sleep paralysis, but I've never experienced anything like that. When I first started investigating, I was much more of a full-on believer. That was back in 2004, and as I've continued investigating, I've sort of flipped sides and become more of a skeptic. Save this experience and maybe a handful of others, I've never really had anything that to me was proof positive of the paranormal or ghosts. And while 90% of what I've experienced or what others have told me can be explained away or rationalized, to this day, this particular incident still boggles my mind and has me wondering what exactly I experienced. As I said, before that and after that, I've never had any sort of sleep paralysis experience with someone else or something else in the room. I've never seen a shadow person in any of my other investigations. And while I do consider that I was in sleep paralysis, what I saw was in fact a typical shadow person by all accounts. Hope you enjoyed the story. Thank you for your time.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this week's stories, darlings. I'm off to reading club now. Yes, I joined a little while ago, and, well, it's my choice of book this week. And I chose The Silence of the Lambs. Such a classic, and such a misunderstood protagonist. Poor Hannibal. All he wanted was a bite to eat. Honestly. Keep leaving your ratings and reviews, kiddies, and I'll see you here next week. Same place, same time. Ciao.